camps, wilderness camps that we stayed in Hwanghae National Park in Zimbabwe. It's what I call the family embrace theme. And I've got two more from Namo Village Market, which is just outside of Hwanghae Park. I bought it from a woman whose son had carved them. There's a certain number of traditional themes, such as the thinker and the lovers and the family embrace. Each individual artist, however, can give his own interpretation of them, and they're also free to invent new themes. So I brought with me tonight one of those new ones that I bought. This is one I don't know what they call it. I call it the thinker, and this is one I bought at the market. I think these things are terrific. I really like them. I had a chance to see literally hundreds, if not thousands of them on this trip. In the city of Victoria Falls, they've been installed in parks and malls. They're very creative, and it's a dynamic, evolving, traditional folk art. And something I'm very impressed with. But this might be an opportune time to go off on a slight tangent, because it was promised in the publicity for this that I talk about some of our collections. There's another folk art that I'm very enthusiastic about, which comes from the Hawaiian island of Niihau Chalets. Niihau is the smallest of the 7 populated Hawaiian islands. It's a very dry island because it's in the rain shadow of Kauai. Ale is the wettest place on earth, and it squeezes all the moisture out of the clouds, so Niihau is kind of a desert. There's only one village there, and it's about fewer than 200 people there. Now, most of Hawaii is covered with flowers. Flowers are very important to the natives of Hawaii because they make leis out of them, and they use these leis for celebratory purposes, to greet someone or for a wedding, all kinds of purposes. The Niihauans are kind of a vine because they don't have any flowers. But what they do have instead is a remarkable shell that washes up on their beaches. It does occur elsewhere, but the conditions are just perfect in Niihau to make a broad variety of very, very colorful and very durable shells. So they go down to the beach and painstakingly pick these things up and sort them and clean them, and then they string them into wonderful leis. So I brought an example of that tonight. This is just one example of what they do with these things. This is a 3-strand lei, which they call a lei pona. That just means it's a mixed lei because it has some of these relatively larger shells here. They're called momi, and then down here are these very, very brightly colored smaller shells called kahileana. Chuna and I have been collecting these for almost a quarter of a century. We now have about 60 of them. And our friends in Kauai who deal in these say that we have one of the best collections they've ever seen. So we're very pleased that the Bishop Museum in Honolulu has agreed to show our collection there for 3 months, beginning at the end of October. We're very happy about this because we're very bullish about this art form. I think it's terrific, and we'd like the opportunity to share it with more people. And it is an evolving art form also. We've seen over the years that people invent new forms of stringing these shells. There's a number of other folk arts that we enjoy very much also. Mata Ortiz pottery, which comes from a small village in northern Mexico. Southwestern Native American jewelry. Russian lacquerware boxes and charm-like sculptures are several of the things that we have collected over the years. So let me return now to Africa. The next thing I wanted to talk about is what I regard as their obsession with gender. Now, we all have a gender, and we're all aware of other people's genders, and at times it's an important part of the relationship. But a lot of times it isn't. And sometimes it's people. And over my lifetime, I've seen happily a diminution in the focus on gender. More of the time for people, less of the time men and women. In our mathematics classes, for example, what we're concerned about is how well people can think, how well they can do logical analysis, how creatively they can solve problems. So what goes on in the brain is important. What kind of body carries it around is not important at all. You don't care how big it is, how old it is, what color is the skin, what color is the hair, or how much it is, how many eyes, how many legs, how many testicles. None of this matters. Well, in Africa it matters all the time. They are conscious of gender 24/7. Everything you do is either as a man or a woman. For example, one day we went to this little village, one village, outside of Bangui National Park in Zimbabwe. We met for about an hour at the head man of the village in a village meeting hall, which was an open, round, thatch-roofed hut. He sat in a big chair, somewhat like this one I'm sitting in. By the way, this is such a comfortable chair, I probably won't fall asleep if I do it. That pillow looks like it's a throne. Anyway, there were benches around the outside, and at his direction, the men sat to his right and the women to his left. And he insisted we had to divide ourselves by gender. Or, in the camps, when we had our meals, it was a buffet style, we would be invited to the buffet line by gender. And usually, men first, because that's the typical rule in Africa. Men go first. Every now and then they would say, well, we know you Westerners have this hang up with ladies first, so tonight we'll do it different. We'll invite the women to go first. But then there'd be some rumbling in the back about the decline of old African traditions. Now, I know another culture in which the gender divide is very significant, and that's the Eskimo culture. Eskimo society is very strongly, traditional society anyway, is very strongly divided along gender lines. Men go out and hunt and fish, bring in the game. Once it's back in the village, then it's the women's job to make food out of the flesh and clothing out of the hides. Despite this bright and shining line, it's very porous. So if a young man says, well, I really like cooking and sewing, I really don't want to do hunting and fishing. Or a young woman says, I'm not interested in that domestic stuff, I want to get out there and hunt. That's okay. It's your movie. Do what you like. Whatever floats your boat. It's not ours to judge you. It's a very much live and let live culture. So the line between the genders is very porous. Not so narrow. No, it's very, very soft, very hard. It's impenetrable. We specifically asked about this. Well, what if a young man says, well, I'm not interested in all that manly stuff. I'd like to do things that maybe regard as feminine. Oh, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. So we insisted, well, what if the young man says, I'm going to do it anyway? Well, Dad knows this young man would be mocked. He would be ostracized, shamed, possibly even banished. And it would be even worse for a young woman who might actually have physical violence done to her, she might be beaten or raped or even murdered if she tried to cross the gender. So it's a very serious matter. Another thing I want to talk about from Africa is what they call Ubuntu. Now see, the story about gender was kind of a downer, but Ubuntu is good news. There's not really a good word in English equivalent to Ubuntu, but it means a kind of a sense of belonging to a community, a sense of community spirit. We're all in this together. We have responsibilities to our community. We will take care of each other. We heard about this in Namo Village. We heard it again, same word, in townships of South Africa. The townships, by the way, are not the same thing that we mean by townships. They were, in the apartheid era, ghettos for black people. Today, they're still there. The rules are, they're not required to live there. There's a lot of middle class people living in them just because they would rather live with the black people, I guess, and for the cultural participation. Ubuntu. And of course, they're not the only ones who have Ubuntu. One of the things I liked about Russia when I visited in 1962 and again in 1986, this was when it was still Marxist, was the sense of Ubuntu. We also see it, however, in the Eskimo community. People are very much oriented toward their community. It's worth mentioning this, I think, because I think this is contrary to general ideology in our country. Now, there are exceptions, of course, but our image is the self-made man. Go it alone type. Do it yourself. And there's much less significant sense, at least in culture as a whole, on this concept of Ubuntu. No. Now I thought I'd talk about how I became the cranky old maverick that I am, who has never eaten a Big Mac in his life, or drunk a Starbucks coffee, or shopped in Walmart, who thinks he pays too little tax, and who doesn't have a Facebook account. I was an atheist at 14, a Marxist at 16, a homosexual at 18. But not in my preteens. I wasn't a maverick then. In fact, quite the opposite. I was a straight arrow. I was a goody two-shoes. I was a teacher's pet. All of these are descriptions that were made of me by my kindly, loving, nurturing peers. But I took it upon me, hey, look, we're just kids. What do we know? We've got to have faith in our adults, our parents, our teachers, our doctors, our preachers. They've been around, they've had experience, they've got wisdom, they know what's going on. Trust them. They say we need to learn something, we should learn it. They say, do this, we should do it. Don't do this, don't do it. And such faith in that. And so, of course, a lot of questions I probably should have asked. Some questions like, why do boys and girls have separate washrooms? What good are fractions anyway? My disillusionment with adults resulted from discovering that various things that various adults were saying were contradictory. And without even knowing who was right and who was wrong, we know somebody's got to be wrong. Some adults were saying things that were wrong, and some adults could be saying things that were wrong. Any adult could be saying things that were wrong. Well, you might be interested in the story of how this happened. It goes back to when I was 7 years old. My mother decided that I should be acquainted with the local public library. So we went down there and spent a couple hours picking out a book for me. We got one, which I can still remember to this day. It involved a fanciful journey in a spaceship around our solar system, visiting the various planets. Now, of course, this was 1947, and many spaceships at that time. We were still in the V-2 rocket era, using technology that we got from the Nazi scientists. But it was a vehicle for learning about the solar system. Several years later, when I was in 7th grade science class, our class was commissioned to prepare a skit for the general school. I suggested we riff off of this scenario, and everybody liked this, so we did it. We set up some chairs, we painted a piece of cardboard to look like the interior of the spaceship, and had some some other cardboard that was decorated to look like the planets, and some of the classmates would be carrying them around the back. Sounded like a great idea. It's a complete flop. It taught me the meaning of one very important word: rehearse. The other part of this book was about a sort of a capsule history here, how it condensed out of cosmic matter, and it was very violent and hot at first, but it cooled off, and there were oceans, and there were cosmic rays which caused these various chemicals to form amino acids, and then there was living cells, one-cell organisms. That took place about 2 billion years ago. 2 billion years ago. About 600 million years ago, these single-cell organisms began to get together, and we had multi-cell organisms, and there was a proliferation of life forms, and the dinosaurs who ruled the Earth for 200 million years until just 66 million years ago, last Thursday, when an asteroid collided with the Earth and made a Chicxulub crater off Yucatan and wiped out the dinosaurs. So the next thing you know, the mammals took over, and there was evolution, these new primates and Homo sapiens. Some of you may not know the Disney film Fantasia, put out in 1940 actually, a series of classical music pieces with cartoon stories that go with them. One of them was the Stravinsky Rite of Spring. Now, Stravinsky had his own program for his music, but Disney abandoned that and basically set a cartoon of the history of the Earth to music, pretty much the same thing that I just described. So that was my introduction to science. In the meantime, of course, there's Sunday school. Yeah, we had a religious family. We were fanatics. We didn't stand on a lot of fine theological points. Truth be told, I think my father was probably deep down an atheist. I think he went to church because my mother wanted him to. When my father was on his deathbed, I ventured to ask him if he believed in the immortality of the soul. And he said, I don't know what you mean. And I said, well, do you think some part of your personality or your consciousness will continue to exist after your body dies? And he says, I don't think mine will. And I don't think he meant that humorously, but I still have to chuckle with it, because philosophers have been arguing for 25 centuries about whether we have immortal souls or not, but I don't think anybody ever suggested that some people have one. When my mother went to church, because she died in prison, well, I was baptized as an Episcopalian, and that was my mother's family's religion. But after I was about 2, my family bought a house, and there was no Episcopal church near, so we became Presbyterians. My father's childhood religion, and they really liked the minister. But when we moved to Battle Creek, we didn't like the Presbyterian church. I use the word we loosely. Too formal. Well, a lot of the neighbors were going to the Congregational church, so we switched to that. For about a year, but that didn't work out either, so we went back to the Episcopal church. We were happily Episcopalian the rest of our stay in Battle Creek and all through Kankakee, Illinois, and into New York. New York, we didn't like the Episcopal church, so we became Congregationalists. Now, I've had quite a journey since then, as I related before, but my family was quite stable after that point, and they continued to go to that church for a long time. My brother was married in 1965. My father's memorial service was held there in 1995. Shortly after my father's death, my mother began to develop Alzheimer's, and she spent the final years of her life in an Episcopal church home for the bewildered outside of Louisville, Kentucky. So in Sunday school, I'm learning all this usual stuff about how God waved the magic wand and said, let there be light. In 6 days, we got the whole creation, and there was the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve and the snake, and no one near our almost. You all know that. And one day, it occurred to me, wait a minute. We got this story, and we got this story about how we all got here. They can't both be true. These are contradictory. This was a major concern. Suddenly I realized adults are saying things that couldn't possibly be true. I don't know, was it this reason, but somebody's wrong. So I thought, well, which one am I going to believe? I got this group over here that's going out and gathering all the evidence with their telescopes and their microscopes, and they carefully assembled this into a theory. And we're here, I have this musty, dusty black book that was written thousands of years ago by so many savages. Which one should I believe? Well, I think I'll segue from there into how I got interested in mathematics. When I was a boy, I was considered good in math, but that really meant good in arithmetic, and that's not really the same thing. There are people who are good at arithmetic and make a lot of mathematicians, and there are some great mathematicians who can't balance their checkbook. So it wasn't a foregone conclusion I was going to go into mathematics. That book that I told you about astronomy, that really piqued my interest. I became